In the wake of the tragic shooting against two National Guard members in D.C., President Trump is taking next steps in his immigration crackdown. A day after the shooting, Trump posted on Truth Social he will permanently pause migration from what he calls all third world countries. Hours later, the U.S. announced it was pausing all asylum decisions and issuing visas to people from Afghanistan. The State Department also announced it was halting visas for Afghans, including those who had allied with the U.S. and helped during the war in their country. Joining us now is Democratic Congressman Robert Garcia of California. He serves as the ranking member of the House Oversight Committee. Congressman, you're an immigrant yourself. You came here from Peru when you were 5 years old with your mother, and you became a citizen in your early 20s. So as someone who's had to go through the immigration process, what's your reaction when you see this crackdown, just wide scale, on Afghan refugees?
I think first it's important to remember that these Afghan refugees and many others have in our country because of their actual service to keeping our country safe and our national security. And this idea that we're going to turn our backs on people and families who worked to keep our military members alive, who worked to ensure that our national security interests, that our interests, whether it relates to diplomacy, to building influence around the world, that we're going to turn our backs on them at this moment, for all they have done is so un-American and against the values that we have strived as a country to uphold. And we also should remember at this moment, this country in large part was built by immigrants. Immigrants built this country. They've contributed, they continue to. We have been a country where the best and the brightest from around the world come here oftentimes, whether it's to go to the university or to work, where people come here to give their labor, oftentimes taking jobs that other folks don't want to do. And so Donald Trump is doing exactly the opposite of what he should be doing. Everyone in this country right now, of course, is mourning what has happened as it relates to our National Guardsmen and the horrific life that's been lost. We can all agree that it's horrific, and this instance needs to be fully investigated. We need to learn from it and move forward and make any corrections that we may need to make. But let's also remember this is the person that committed this horrific act was someone that worked with the CIA, that clearly went through intense vetting. So let's get the facts first, and let's not demonize our immigrant, migrant, and asylum population.
Congressman, I have also written in the past my support for making sure we bring over our Afghan allies who supported us at great risk to themselves and their families. But I understand that a lot of Americans right now may be concerned that our vetting process is insufficient, that in this particular case, the alleged shooter was obviously vetted by multiple administrations in working with the United States, coming here and ultimately being granted asylum by this administration. Is there a role for Congress to play to figure out what went wrong here? And what could or should change? Was this person not sufficiently vetted? Did he lie in his applications? Basically, what can you say to make Americans feel less concerned that this event is in fact, a one-off event, as opposed to something that would warrant a broader crackdown on our allies?
I think it's first important to recognize that anytime an incident like this happens, Congress and the administration have an important role in assessing what happened and trying to ensure that we create systems that are safe and course correct on any errors or any process that might be in place that we actually need to make better. So I think that is an important part of this, which is why we have to get the information and learn from it. At the same time, we have to remember that there are bad people in every profession, at every level of government, in the military, in our schools, in our hospitals. And so we're always going to have people that do horrific things. And that this instance, for example, shouldn't somehow just erase all of the incredible and heroic work that so many Afghan refugees and their families have done to keep our military members safe and our country safe. And so this was a horrific act. We need to investigate what happened. And Congress, certainly Oversight, Armed Services Committee, so many other committees in the Congress have a real role to ensure this does not happen again. But we are also always going to have in this country and around the world, people that want to do harm, things that we cannot explain. And oftentimes, and I hope we find out exactly why this happened, but it's important to note that these types of moments for us is about coming together, supporting the families and the National Guard in need, and then, of course, improving the system for the future.
Congressman, what can you and your office do right now for constituents who may be worried about their status in the United States, who may have been living here for quite a long while already, who have plans to put their kids into certain schools, continue building their lives and careers here safely in the U.S., who have no connection to this shooter, to this incident whatsoever, but who are looking at the things that the president is putting out on social media, the countries that he's planning to target, and wondering if they're going to be able to stay here? What kind of support are you, as a member of Congress, able to offer them in this moment?
I've actually been speaking with other colleagues over just the last few days. And in fact, we've been doing this now for many months since this administration started. We are consistently communicating with constituents and folks from the public that are very scared. Whether these are folks that are here on some type of temporary visa, whether these are people that have been just working, oftentimes for decades in this country, trying to gain a pathway to residency or citizenship, whether these are students who are here on a visa, and oftentimes people are just here working hard, and they're trying to figure out whether they have to be concerned about being deported and essentially lose everything in their family by being in this country. What Donald Trump is doing to us right now is not what this country has been about, what we've built towards. And I wish the Republican Party would look back to its leaders like Ronald Reagan, who actually created a system in this country. The last major immigration reform bill and amnesty was done by a Republican president not that long ago. And so there is, in this moment, we should be thinking about how do we improve our immigration system? How do we create pathways? How do we create not just pathways to citizenship, but worker programs, guest programs for permanent and temporary residency? Thinking about how do we strengthen our immigration laws? How do we work with our refugee program and our programs to ensure that migrants are coming here and are being vetted the right way? Those are the solutions that Donald Trump and the House majority are not interested in. But at this moment, we're going to ensure that we look at every single possible action as to how we fix this incident so it doesn't happen again.
Congressman Robert Garcia, good to see you. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Let's bring back Michael McCaul, of course, former U.S. ambassador to Russia, now an MS Now international affairs analyst. So we didn't get a lot, but there is a positive tone there that they are going to continue negotiations. When I was asking you questions, you said it's a lot of big questions and you don't have a lot of answers yet. Do you think that's almost the place where they are inside that negotiating room as they talk around that table? And as part of the reason they don't have the answers, because they don't have Russia in that conversation too. How effective can this be, the shuttle diplomacy, in this particular situation? Look what we've seen over 4 years, Ambassador. I mean, at what point does it have to be Russia and Ukraine at the table together?
Well, to end the war, it has to be Zelensky and Putin in the room. That's a very good point. We can help, we can facilitate, but we can't make those big decisions for Zelensky or Putin. That's got to be part of the end game. I think what the important point also is that for Ukraine, the security guarantee is the most essential piece. And for that part, Putin does not need to be in the room. And I think, not to read too much into the tea leaves of what Secretary Rubio just said, but he hinted at that. He said it's not just ending the war that's important. It's ending the war so that Ukraine can be prosperous. Well, Ukraine can only be prosperous if it's secure. That's the way Ukrainians think about their future. They just don't want to end this war now and have it start again 3 or 4 years down the road. That's what happened between 2014 and 2022. So I actually think those two negotiations should be separate. Have a negotiation with Putin about a ceasefire, where the border is going to be de facto or de jure. And then the separate conversation is about the security guarantees, where Putin should not have a seat at the table for that set of negotiations. That should be between Ukraine, the United States, and our European allies.
I just want to reflect on something, a conversation I had earlier with Illinois Congressman Mike Quigley, who is on the Ukraine subcommittee and has been very, very involved in that. And he recalled a conversation we had, as in me, with the congressman at the beginning of this war. And he said the 4 points that will have to be addressed to successfully conclude this war will be the two that you've just spoken about, the security guarantees and a level of sovereignty, if you will, for Ukrainian land, but also the possibility of holding Putin accountable in addition to helping to rebuild Ukraine. Those last 2 points, will they be something that will be addressed and successfully so as we bring about the war end?
Well, I completely agree with Congressman Quigley that should be the way the war ends, especially the accountability for Putin, the war crimes that have been committed by his Russian soldiers. That should be there. And most certainly reconstruction should be. I'm more optimistic about us getting an agreement on reconstruction than I am about accountability. And on reconstruction, I think it's very easy. We have between $250 and $300 billion of Russian central bank assets sitting mostly in Europe, but also here in the United States. Give that money to Ukraine for reconstruction and call it reparations. To me, that is so easy. It should have been done 3 years ago. I hope that's part of the negotiations. Bringing Putin to be accountable, I think, will be a much harder lift. And maybe that'll have to be one that'll be a can kicked down the road, but I hope never forgotten.
Okay. Always appreciate your sage advice, my friend, U.S. Ambassador to Russia, formerly Michael McFaul. We'll see you again. Thank you.
Congress is back in session tomorrow. And the first item on the docket, allegedly, is health care. But their return may be overshadowed by Trump's reaction to the shooting of 2 National Guard troops in D.C. this week. With the administration halting all asylum decisions and visas for Afghan individuals, Trump spent part of the weekend this holiday ranting about Democrats and immigrant communities. And for 6 Democrats, they returned to Capitol Hill in the wake of Trump's FBI requesting interviews with them after they told the military they could refuse to carry out unlawful orders. Trump has called their behavior seditious, which he has said is, quote, punishable by death. Here to discuss it all and much more is House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. Leader Jeffries, thank you for coming on this holiday weekend. I want to get into, before we get into all of the things that you guys are going to do when you get back here, I want to read a Trump post about him denaturalizing, in his word, migrants. This is from Thursday. He posts that he wants to denaturalize migrants who undermine domestic tranquility and deport any foreign national who is a public charge, security risk, or, in his words, non-compatible with Western civilization. What is your reaction to the President of the United States using this kind of language, especially the non-compatible with Western civilization?
Well, good morning, Eugene. Great to be with you. He continues to rant and rave in very unhinged ways, and I think the American people are sick and tired of it. What we want is a president who shows leadership, who brings people together, who addresses the problems that the American people want addressed, first and foremost, driving down the high cost of living, as opposed to constantly having meltdowns on social media, which is exactly what he did. And I believe that post was on Thanksgiving of all days. Now, listen, we support a strong border. We support the notion that we need to fix our broken immigration system, but we should do it in a comprehensive and bipartisan way. We also are going to continue to stand by law-abiding immigrant communities, stand by our farmers, stand by our farm workers, and stand by our dreamers at the same time.
Leader Jeffries, Congress comes back into session tomorrow, both the House and the Senate. And the big thing that should be the first order of business is doing something about extending those Affordable Care Act subsidies. Doesn't seem like there's any appetite for it in the House, even though the President of the United States, even though President Trump has said he wants to do something. You've got 12 legislative days left in this calendar year to do something. How confident are you that, one, something can get done, and two, that you and Leader Schumer in the Senate will meet with the president to get something done in 12 legislative days?
Well, you're absolutely right. The clock is ticking in terms of making sure that we extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits to prevent tens of millions of hardworking American taxpayers from experiencing dramatically increased health care premiums, copays, and deductibles. In some cases, those health insurance costs will increase by $1,000 or $2,000 per month. That is unsustainable. And we cannot have a situation where people will be unable to afford to go see a doctor here in America, the wealthiest country in the history of the world. Now, Jonathan, as you asked, the interesting thing about this is that when, Donald Trump usually says to House Republicans, do something, when he tells them to jump, they just say how high. And he asked them to enact the largest cut to Medicaid in American history. They did it. He asked them to cut $186 billion from SNAP in the one big ugly bill, literally ripping food from the mouths of hungry children, seniors, and veterans. They did it. In that same one big ugly bill, he asked them to enact these massive tax breaks for their billionaire donors and make them permanent. They did it. But when Donald Trump floats a possible proposal to try to extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits, now they want to act like they're a separate and co-equal branch of government when it comes to actually helping the American people. It's extraordinary. And so we need to find a handful of House Republicans to join us. We've got 212 Democrats on a discharge petition to force an up or down vote on a 3-year extension of the Affordable Care Act tax credits. And we need just a few of my Republican colleagues to show some guts and show some courage and stand up for the people that they represent.
Leader Jeffries, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth verbally ordered a military strike on Venezuela that legal experts are saying is tantamount to murder. Are you going to call for Pete Hegseth's resignation?
Yeah, what's interesting is that I called for Pete Hegseth's resignation back in the spring. The guy is totally and woefully unqualified, the most unqualified so-called Secretary of Defense in American history. And so it's long past time that he's got to go. Now, the big challenge we have is, what is the justification for what many people rightfully believe are extrajudicial killings off the coast of South America? We've had a few classified briefings that I've been a part of, and I've seen no evidence to actually justify the strikes that are taking place. We need a full congressional briefing as well. And the administration, if they believe they have the authority to do this, if they believe these targets undermine America's national security, then they need to present that evidence. But we've seen nothing to date.
Should Democrats be drafting articles of impeachment against Hegseth right now? Is that something you're considering for this week ahead?
Well, I think the problem is we can't even get Republicans to extend the Affordable Care Act tax credit. So the reality is that type of accountability is not happening in this Congress with these people who continue to be nothing more than a reckless rubber stamp for Donald Trump's extreme agenda. What we should be doing is making sure that there's a strong bipartisan investigation as it relates to what's happening under Pete Hegseth's so-called leadership. And that's been a challenge throughout the balance of this year. Moving forward, it seems like there's some interest in the Senate amongst Republicans in scrutinizing the behavior of the Department of Defense off the coast of South America. So let's see what emerges in the House of Representatives.
Leader Jeffries, one of the things that I hear a lot, and I think maybe these two maybe as well, from immigration advocates, is that they wish that the Democratic Party was more vocally defensive and talked more optimistically about immigrants. We had Andrea Flores from who was on just a week ago saying something similar. And I'm curious, and I heard you talk about Dreamers and all of that, and so that's why it popped into my head. So I'm curious, when you think about the balance of voters wanting, stronger borders, that immigration continues to be, maybe the one category that Donald Trump is not underwater on, how does the Democratic Party talk about immigrants as beneficial to society and immigration as a net plus to the American experiment?
Well, we want to continue to make clear as a country that hardworking immigrant families are an important part of the fabric of communities throughout America. I think it's actually one of the reasons why we've seen Donald Trump, even on immigration in the most recent Gallup poll, underwater. the American people are of the view that, of course, it is appropriate to deport violent felons, to deport people who present a safety risk to the American people. However, that's not what we've been seeing from this aggressive extremism that Donald Trump has unleashed through his immigration policies all across the country. They're not deporting violent felons, by and large. They're deporting families. In some cases, they're actually deporting American citizen children or separating them from their parents. And the American people have zero interest in that. Now, we've got to continue to balance as we move forward these two principles of America as a nation anchored in the rule of law, and we have to continue to uphold that, but also a nation of immigrants, a gorgeous mosaic of people who have come to America from all throughout the world and have made us the envy of the world because of the dynamism that creates.
Speaker Jeffries, we're out of time, but I can't have you here without asking you about, speaking of polls, Marist poll out shows that if the midterm elections were held today, 55% said that they would vote for the Democratic candidate, 41% say they would vote for the Republican candidate. As with all polls, this is a snapshot in time, but there is a special election happening on Tuesday in Tennessee's 7th Congressional District. How confident are you that State Representative of the Democrat Afton Bain will win that? And two, do you expect to be Speaker of the House before the midterm elections?
Well, you know, I'm confident that it's going to be a close race in the Tennessee special election, which is shocking in and of itself, because this is a district that Donald Trump just won by 22 points. And Republicans are scrambling to hold on to a deep red district. And so we'll see what the voters of Tennessee decide, but it definitively is going to be a close race. And that in and of itself is a great surprise. And I think evidence of the fact that we are on our way to taking back control of the House of Representatives. We'll see what happens with Republican resignations and if something interesting occurs next year. But as Democrats, we're going to continue to fight to lower the high cost of living, continue to fight to fix our broken healthcare system, and continue to fight to make sure that in this country, you work hard, you play by the rules, you should be able to live the good life.
House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries of the great state of New York, doing that gorgeous mosaic reference to the late Mayor David Dinkins of New York City. Thank you very much for coming back to the weekend.
New reaction from the Trump administration to a clash between police and protesters in New York City Saturday over ICE deportations. Several demonstrators were arrested as they appeared to stop a potential ICE raid in the city. Trump administration border czar Tom Homan emphasizing ICE won't be deterred as House Minority Leader Jeffries railed against the administration's efforts.
Look, they're making it more difficult and less efficient. Bottom line is, ICE is out there today. ICE will be out there tomorrow. ICE will be out there every day. Protest all you want. We'll be out there today and tomorrow. We'll be out there every day until we get this job done.
They're not deporting violent felons, by and large. They're deporting families. In some cases, they're actually deporting American citizen children or separating them from their parents. And the American people have zero interest in that.
Let's bring in host of the Fast Politics podcast, Molly Jong-Fast, and host of the In Sync with Alexi podcast, Alexi McCammon, both of whom are MS Now political analysts. Welcome, ladies. Good to see you both. So, Molly, it is the latest in a string of protests against ICE in several cities, combined with the enormity of that No Kings protest that we all covered a couple weekends back. Is resistance against this administration picking up steam, as many predicted it would in this term?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's clear. And you see, when you look at these polls from this weekend, they are really shockingly bad. So, again, this is not popular. We're seeing Trump world, you know, I mean, when you see that segment you just did with Peter Baker, where you were talking about the members of Congress resigning, you know, saying that they have, you know, giving up because they've basically given their power to Trump and to the executive branch. And now we're seeing an executive branch that is a sort of supercharged executive branch, the kind of thing that they had talked about in Project 2025. The problem with supercharged executive branch, especially this particular executive executive branch is that, you're sort of the hostage of the machinations of that executive branch. And so we're seeing a very unhappy Congress and a very unhappy electorate.
So, Lexi, while the president's strongest issues, they still are crime and immigration, he is underwater on both, according to the latest polls, in fact, by a lot. Is the sight of families, to Molly's point, openly being torn apart and people being chased from places where they're just working, is it too far for the American public?
Yeah, those images and videos certainly don't help their cause, and they really show the American people what's going on and the harmful effects of these immigration policies being carried out by Trump's administration. But then you also get folks who have family members who are being taken away, or friends of family that they've known since they were younger, getting online, getting on TikTok and sharing personal stories, for example, about the person that they knew and how unfair it feels that they've been taken away. And those personal stories travel far and wide too, and really, I think, do something to people's psyche. And really, it's just sort of a black and white issue to a lot of people when they hear the human side of what's going on, rather than hearing about it in terms of a policy or political debate.
Molly, there may be signs of the MAGA base cracking somewhat. There was that Politico poll, which finds a sizable 38% of people who voted for president last year, President Trump, they do not identify as a MAGA Republican. Has Trump lost the support of independents and moderate Republicans already? Will politically savvy Republicans start distancing themselves?
Well, I think if you look at Marjorie Taylor Greene, that's a great example of a politically savvy Republican distancing themselves from Trump, right? She said her kids can't afford health insurance. She said, Marjorie Taylor Greene does not separate herself from Donald Trump unless she sees the writing on the wall. And in fact, if you read her resignation statement, which was very long and fulsome, and then there was a video, and she really did make a point of saying, I am MAGA, this is not MAGA. And again, that is really meaningful because remember, we've had Senate Republicans terrified to vote against Trump's picks, right? We saw Senate Republicans say, well, RFK Jr. and Pete Hegseth, these people aren't qualified, but we're going to vote anyway because basically they said everything but we're terrified. So to have Marjorie Taylor Greene go out there, do this video, do this 4-page resignation letter and say, like, Trump is more interested in the globalist interests. We can dissect what that means, but and we probably should, but it's important to realize that is cracks in MAGA. That is exactly what we were watching there.
And in fact, there's also this, Alexei, second term, low approval rating for the president by Gallup. His 36% now is just 2 points higher than Gallup's polling immediately after the January 6th Capitol riot. Are you surprised Trump's numbers are this bleak less than a year in? Will he care that this could spell disaster for Republicans in the next year? Because with losing the House or maybe tightening up the Senate, would it affect his agenda, which is largely full of executive orders?
Yeah, no, and that's the thing, Alex. It's like Donald Trump does not care about helping other Republicans get elected. He cares about them being winners. But in the past, when he has sent out to campaign with Republicans running in midterm elections, he made it all about himself and barely talked about the candidates or the elected officials running at hand. And so he doesn't care. He will sign executive orders, do what he wants. He would leave the government shut down forever and ever for all he cares. He would circumvent Congress to get whatever he wants done. And so, no, I don't think that it's surprising, though, that his approval is so low, just given how unpopular he is as a person, how unpopular his policies are. And then to the conversation you were just having with Molly, folks who were diehard MAGA are no longer willing to associate with him and that part of the Republican Party. And that goes for elected officials and popular podcasters like Candace Owens, Joe Rogan, Megyn Kelly, Theo Vaughn, these people who are openly saying, you know what, MAGA is over and I'm not even a part of it. And that is decidedly different than it was the first time around.
So, Molly, Democrats have sold the party as a big tent for all, right? Does this still hold up? Will an outspoken or defiant progressive wing tolerate or forgive moderates who may now regret a 2024 Trump vote?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're going to have to if they want to win, right? Winning is addition, not subtraction. That's what, that is the great sort of political theory of all time. So in order to create the big tent, you need to win. You're going to have to accept in some of those moderates. Now, I would say I'm not sure trying to appeal to Liz Cheney voters, as we saw in 2024, because it turns out those people are Democrats. But what we saw in Georgia is a great example in the 2025 cycle. You saw Republicans voting for these Georgia state legislature, these energy board seats, and they did it because they were angry about energy prices. There's a really good piece in the Times today about that. And again, are they Democrats? Not really, but they're angry about energy prices. And those are voters that you would like to get in a 2026 midterms. You don't have to have them forever. You just have to have them for this cycle. And if you can make a case for them, then you will. I mean, one of the things we saw with Trump was he won these Latino voters. He won some low frequency voters. Those voters are now not going to vote for him. Certainly the ICE, what we're seeing with ICE is a pretty good, example of him not keeping a promise to those voters, right? He said, I'm going to deport the people who are here who did crimes. And that's not what we're seeing. That's a very small percentage. So I do think you're going to see a bigger coalition, and you have to in order to win.
Okay. As you said, it's all about the math. Molly Jong-Fast, Alexi McCammon. Ladies, thank you both so much.